tell me when. Go 3, 2, 1, go.
It's recording.
Oh,
Just
okay.
go.
Bernie, thank you for being here today. We really appreciate it. I'm going to ask you a few questions. The first is, what does it mean to be a writer today?
When you first sent these questions over to me, I've had them now for about a day or so, and I looked through this and I thought that first one, that is by far and away the most interesting question, and it's also the one that I'm at a complete loss to what it might be. What'll happen, I think, on probably most of these questions, maybe on all of them, I'll get very, very theoretical, because that's the only way I know how to deal with a lot of these things. And the thing about being a writer is that the notion, the idea that people don't own language. It's not theirs to somehow to use and to manipulate. It's that way, I think, only in terms of certain illusions that rhetoric may have. And let me tell you a story.
Okay.
All right. I wrote that book, the one that you talked about now and then, Renee. And I was at Four Seas, and there were some people who wanted to talk to me, to interview me about the book. And the thing was, when the book came out, number one, I didn't want to read it because I knew I was going to find mistakes, typos, this sort of thing. And I didn't want to deal with that, at least so soon. And secondly, because it was my writing, I knew that I would cringe now and then whenever I'd see the way things were phrased and thought, well, I should have done it this way rather than that.
Yeah.
So I hadn't even looked at the book in all that time. And then these grad students started to ask me questions about it. I had no idea what they were talking about. And I would sort of try to hem and haw and try to give them an answer. But finally I'd say, well, where did you see that? And then they'd point to something and I'd look at it and I would read it and I had to think for a while and I would say, oh, I know what he was saying here. Because it was one of those things again where language is the critical thing. Language is the thing that in essence speaks to us.
Yeah.
And so that is the particular thing that I learned about what being a writer is all about. It's that in the end language would own us. In the Phaedrus, Plato says that logos must have a father, a source. And I always thought, well, what could be more logical than that? A source for language would be us. But I think that now, the source for language in some sense is language itself. And I always come back to that. And so when I think about what it means to be a writer today, I somehow think that it comes down to some sort of appreciation for that notion of language. That language in essence may be something pretty sacred, very, very significant, and in any number of ways bigger and more important than the writer. And if the writer can understand that, well then that's what a writer would be. And of course that idea is very, very old. It tends to be a minority position all the way since Plato. But that is the idea. When you start to write, you sort of have a responsibility that in every sense of the word is quite sacred, and to misuse or abuse language, to take and make of it what you will, you have to be pretty careful. And of course that whole idea just runs counter to what rhetoric is all about, you know, this whole idea of using language to somehow to persuade people, to get them to think along with you.
Yeah.
But again, when I come back to what a writer is today, that's what I come back to. So I think that that's probably as good as I can answer that question, as well as I can answer that question in any event.
So a writer is someone that appreciates language and kind of sees it as something bigger than himself?
Yes, something in the end that just when I was looking at the passages in that book, something that speaks to the person. In some ways, of course, it gets to some more mystical notions of language, that it's not something that we speak, but it speaks through us.
So that's funny, because when I was reading your book, I always felt like you were in some other planet, in some other form of mind or other than your classes.
What the case was is that what some people have said is that it has sort of a very strong religious undercurrent to it. And really, when it comes to religion, I think in all sorts of maybe superficial ways, I tend to be irreligious. I tend to be quite blasphemous and all of these sorts of things. I tend to use obscenities all the time under certain circumstances, but when it comes right down to it, when you start to think of language, you're thinking of something sacred, you're thinking of something religious. You take the word logos, for instance. You see, the idea here is, you see this in Christian bookstores, you know, I am the Word, in the beginning was the Word, and that's the thing. That's the thing that I think would be something that we might want to try to appreciate.
I'm sorry, but when I read your book, I got a sense that the words kind of took you over.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you were talking to that student, you're like, oh, I see what he says. You didn't even own the...
Yeah, I know. Well, that was something that really surprised me because, again, what they expected me to do, and I should have done it, I should have been prepared for those sorts of things. But like I say, I was reluctant, not only reluctant to pick up the book for the reasons that I cited, but also I was so bored with a lot of the stuff.
Yeah.
Because particularly that last year, and the things would come back and you'd edit and edit and edit, and after a while, it just got to be too much.
Yeah.
And I just thought, I need a break from this. I want to move on to something like the rhetoric of war.
Yeah,
that's why that class that you had, Renee, was sort of interesting for me, because I didn't know what I was doing. But I think that in due time, I will know. Get some better ideas. What
you did a great job.
Yeah, what you had to say about sacrifice?
Yeah.
Well, I think that in the end that was very, very instructive, helpful for me, because I could sort of think, oh yeah, I think that might be something that would be quite important, something that ties into language.
Yeah, sacrifice is scary.
Yeah. So those are the things in any event, and again, it tends to be so utterly theoretical and so far removed from say what some of the other people in the department would say, but that is I think the idea that I would ultimately go back to. And it's not to say that in the meantime, when you teach something like freshman comp, you better not go in with that sort of attitude. In the back of your mind, maybe, but when it comes to putting together a research paper, of course, you can't really quite allow that type of theory to be in the forefront, because it wouldn't work, it wouldn't wash at all.
Yeah.
So that is what I think about the writer today, that maybe in the end the genuine writer understands or appreciates the fact that he doesn't or she doesn't own language.
Right.